Ethan Carter's heart hammered violently in his chest as Max, his golden retriever, let out another desperate whimper and threw himself against the wall again. The sound of claws scraping against drywall had become a constant over the past 2 days. But this time, it was different, urgent, frantic. Ethan shot up from the couch, his half-drunk coffee sloshing onto the worn wooden floor. "Max, what is wrong with you?" Ethan's voice wavered as he stepped closer. The dog whined, his entire body trembling as he pawed at the same spot obsessively. Ethan had checked for mice, for water damage, for anything that might explain this behavior, but there was nothing. Except now, the way Max was acting there was something more, something real. Swallowing the lump in his throat, Ethan took a slow breath and reached out, gently pulling Max away. The dog resisted, muscles tense, tail stiff. It was as if every fiber of his being was screaming at Ethan to do something. The thought sent a shiver down his spine. He hadn't believed in ghosts since he was a kid, but right now, he wasn't ruling anything out. All right, buddy, I'll check again." He pressed his ear to the wall. Silence at first. Then a sound, faint, muffled, but unmistakable. Someone was crying. Ethan stumbled back, his breath catching. No, that was impossible. His pulse roared in his ears as he strained for another clue, some proof he wasn't losing his mind. Max barked, tail wagging anxiously, eyes locked onto Ethan as if urging him to act. That was all it took. His hands shook as he grabbed the crowbar from his toolbox. One last deep breath, and he plunged the metal into the drywall, forcing it open with a sickening crack. Dust filled the air. Max barked louder, jumping beside him, nose darting forward. Ethan coughed, waving the dust away, then froze. There, huddled in a tiny space between the walls, was a little girl. Ethan's entire body locked up. She couldn't have been more than 7, her tangled blonde hair falling over her thin face, cheeks streaked with dirt. She clutched her knees, too. Her chest, eyes squeezed shut, as if she thought she was still hidden. Then, slowly, she opened them. Ethan fell back onto his heels. She was real, hey. His voice was barely a whisper. "It's okay, you're safe." The girl didn't respond right away. Her small hands trembled, fingers gripping the hem of her oversized dress. Ethan glanced at Max, who sat quietly now, ears perked, tail wagging softly. There was no hesitation in the dog's gaze-only reassurance. Max had known. He had been trying to help her all along. Ethan turned back to her. "Can you tell me your name?" She hesitated. Then, in a whisper so faint he barely heard it, "Sophie." Ethan's throat tightened. "Sophie, that's a beautiful name. How did you get here?" Sophie glanced around nervously, her chest rising and falling unevenly. She opened her mouth, then shut it again. Ethan's stomach twisted. Whoever had put her there, whoever had done this, she wasn't ready to say it yet. "It's okay." He raised his hands in reassurance. "You don't have to talk about it, right? Now, you're safe. You're not alone." Sophie's eyes flickered to Max, who let out a soft whine and crawled closer, resting his head on her knee. Slowly, she reached out. Her fingers brushed against his fur, and for the first time since Ethan had found her, her lips twitched just the smallest hint of a smile. He exhaled, a weight lifting off his chest. They weren't out of the woods yet, not by a long shot. But one thing was certain. Max had saved her, and Ethan was going to make sure, no matter what happened next, she stayed safe. Ethan reached for his phone. He needed to call the police. He needed to get her help. But as his fingers closed around the device, something in Sophie's expression stopped him. Fear, deep, paralyzing. She didn't want the police. She didn't want to be found, and that terrified Ethan more than anything. He clenched his jaw. "All right, kiddo. We'll figure this out together." Max let out a happy bark, tail thumping against the floor. Ethan scratched behind his ears. He had no idea what they were up against, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let her down. He checked the time. Late afternoon. They had time to figure things out before making any decisions. He needed more information. Was someone looking for her? Had she escaped something terrible? "Are you hungry?" Sophie hesitated, then gave a tiny nod. Ethan motioned for her to follow. "Let's get you something to eat." She stayed close to Max, one hand buried in his fur as they walked toward the kitchen. Ethan pulled out bread, peanut butter, milk, nothing fancy, but it was something. Sophie stood frozen near the doorway, fingers gripping Max's fur like a lifeline. "You can sit if you want." He gestured toward a chair. "I promise you're safe." Here, after a long moment, she stepped forward, Max staying at her side. When she finally climbed onto the chair, she looked so small, so fragile. Ethan placed the plate in front of her. "Here, you must be starving." She stared at the sandwich as if unsure what to do, then cautiously took a small bite. Ethan pretended not to notice the way her eyes darted around, the way she ate like someone who wasn't sure when her next meal would come. "Sophie," he kept his voice gentle, "do you know how long you've been in there?" She paused, mid-bite, eyes flickering to the floor, then shook her head slightly. "Did someone put you there?" This time, she froze completely. Her fingers tightened around the sandwich, her breathing shallow. "Okay." Ethan raised his hands. "You don't have to tell me anything right now." She relaxed just a little, though her eyes still held that haunted look. Ethan felt anger bubbling beneath his concern. Who would do this to a child? Max let out a quiet huff, resting his head against Sophie's knee. She reached down, absently running her fingers through his fur. "Do you have family, someone who might be looking for you?" Sophie's lips parted, but she said nothing. "I won't tell anyone unless you want me to. But if there's someone who cares about you, I'd like to help get you back to them." "No." The word was barely a whisper. Ethan felt something twist in his chest. No family, no one looking for her. Just a little girl hiding behind a wall. "All right. Well, you can stay here for now." Sophie's eyes snapped to his, startled. "I can, of course. You're not going back in that wall, and I'm not about to leave you on your own." Something in her expression cracked. For the first time, she looked less like a scared child and more like someone desperate for safety. Ethan made up his mind then and there. Whoever had put her in that wall, whoever had let this happen, would never get another chance. As Sophie finished her sandwich, Ethan's mind raced. What was the best way to approach this? He couldn't just keep her hidden forever, but she was terrified of the police. He needed a plan. For now, he decided the best thing he could do was make her feel safe. Everything else would come later. "Do you want to see something cool?" Ethan asked, standing up. Sophie tilted her head in curiosity as he walked toward the back door. Max trotted alongside him, tail wagging. Ethan turned the knob and pushed the door open, revealing the backyard. It wasn't much, just a small, fenced-in area with some overgrown grass, but it was quiet. Peaceful. Sophie hesitated, then slowly followed. The afternoon sun cast a warm glow over the space, making the air feel lighter somehow. Max immediately ran to a spot near the fence and started sniffing around, his tail wagging like crazy. Max loves this yard, Ethan said with a small smile. It's his favorite place to play. Sophie watched as the dog pounced on something invisible, rolling onto his back with an excited bark. For the first time since Ethan had found her, she let out the tiniest giggle. It was soft, barely there, but Ethan heard it. He didn't comment, didn't want to scare it away. Instead, he simply stood beside her, letting the moment settle. They had a long way to go, but right now, with the sun shining and Max rolling in the grass, it almost felt like they had time. And for now, that was enough. Ethan leaned against the porch railing, letting the warm air fill his lungs. He needed to figure out what to do next. He couldn't just keep Sophie a secret, but he had to gain her trust before pushing her too hard. "Sophie, would you like to stay in the guest room tonight?" he asked gently. She hesitated before nodding. Ethan took that as progress. "All right, I'll set it up for you. It's nothing fancy, but it has a nice bed and a window." She followed him inside, glancing around nervously. Ethan moved ahead, turning on a lamp and pulling back the blankets on the bed. "Here you go. If you need anything, my room is just down the hall." Sophie stepped inside slowly, her eyes scanning the space. After a few seconds, she turned to Max and whispered, "Will he stay with me?" Ethan nodded. "Of course he can." Max wagged his tail and trotted into the room, curling up beside the bed. Sophie gave him a small, almost grateful smile before sitting on the mattress. Ethan lingered in the doorway for a moment. "Good night, Sophie Dot." She didn't say anything, but she didn't look afraid anymore. Ethan sighed as he walked back to his own room, his mind racing with questions. Who had hurt this little girl? What was she so afraid of? And how could he keep her safe? One thing was clear: Max had found her for a reason, and Ethan wasn't going to stop until he had answers. Ethan barely slept that night. He tossed and turned, his mind tangled in a web of questions. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Sophie's hollow gaze, the way her tiny fingers trembled when she held Max's fur. He had no doubt she had been through something unimaginable, but how much danger was she in, and was she safe here with him? By the time the morning sun crept through the blinds, Ethan had made up his mind. He needed answers, but he had to tread carefully. One wrong move could send Sophie running, and that was the last thing he wanted. He pulled on a sweatshirt, headed to the kitchen. The house was silent except for the soft hum of the fridge. He peeked into the guest room. Sophie was curled up under the blankets, Max lying beside her like a guardian. For the first time since he'd found her, she looked peaceful. Ethan let her sleep and started making breakfast. He wasn't much of a cook, but scrambled eggs and toast would do. The smell filled the house, and soon he heard tiny footsteps behind him. "Morning," Ethan said, without turning around. Sophie didn't reply. She lingered near the doorway, one hand gripping the hem of her oversized shirt. Max trotted past her and flopped down near the kitchen table, stretching out with a satisfied groan. Ethan slid a plate across the table. "I made some eggs." Thought he might be hungry. Sophie hesitated, then shuffled forward and climbed onto a chair. She picked at the toast first, nibbling the edges like she was testing it. Ethan poured himself some coffee and sat across from her. He waited until she had eaten a few bites before speaking. "I was thinking maybe we could go into town today," he said casually. "Get you some clothes, maybe a few things you like." Sophie's chewing slowed. She lowered the toast, her shoulders tensing. Ethan kept his expression neutral. We don't have to if you don't want to, he added quickly. I just figured you might like something other than my old t-shirts. Sophie glanced down at the oversized shirt. She was wearing it, swallowed her small frame. After a moment, she gave the tiniest nod. Ethan took that as a win. All right then, we'll take it slow. He finished his coffee and stood up. You can bring Max if you want. He likes car rides. At the mention of his name, Max perked up, tail thumping against the floor. Sophie looked at the dog, then at Ethan, then back at Max. Finally, she nodded again by the time they were in Ethan's truck. Sophie was curled up in the passenger seat, Max squished between them. Ethan kept the radio on low as they drove into town. He kept glancing at Sophie, watching for any sign of panic, but she stayed quiet, her fingers twisting in Max's fur. Their first stop was a small thrift store. Ethan figured it would be less overwhelming than a big department store. Sophie stuck close to his side, her eyes darting around nervously. Ethan let her take the lead, giving her space to pick out what she wanted. She lingered in the children's section, her fingers brushing over a faded blue sweater. Ethan picked up a few other things, some jeans. A couple of soft-looking shirts and held them out. These look good. Sophie hesitated, then nodded. Ethan smiled. After paying, they stopped by a small cafe. Ethan grabbed a coffee, and Sophie got a cup of hot chocolate. She wrapped her hands around it like it was the warmest thing she'd ever felt. Ethan took a slow sip of his drink. You did good today. Sophie looked up, surprised. Ethan shrugged. I know this isn't easy, but you're doing great. Sophie's lips parted slightly, like she wanted to say something, but instead she just nodded and took another sip of her hot chocolate. Ethan let the silence sit between them. He wasn't going to push her, not yet, but one day she'd tell him the truth. And when she did, he'd be ready. For now, he'd just make sure she knew she was safe. They sat in the cafe for a while longer. Ethan noticed Sophie relaxing just a little, her shoulders not as rigid, her eyes no longer darting toward the door. Every few seconds, it was progress, however small. As they stepped back outside, Ethan Carter noticed the shift in Sophie Bennett's expression. Her gaze was locked onto the street, fingers tightening around her cup. Ethan followed her line of sight and spotted a man across the road, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a dark jacket. Nothing about him seemed unusual, except for the way Sophie had frozen. Ethan placed a steady hand on her shoulder. Sophie flinched, her grip on Max's leash turning white-knuckled. Her breathing turned shallow, lips parting as if she wanted to speak, but no words came. Ethan didn't push. Instead, he stepped in front of her, blocking her from the man's line of sight. Whether the stranger was someone she knew or someone she feared, Ethan wasn't taking chances. Let's go home, he said gently. Sophie didn't hesitate. She turned, walking quickly toward the truck. Ethan followed, keeping an eye on the man until they were safely inside. Only then did he let out a slow breath. As they drove away from town, Ethan glanced at Sophie again. She was staring out the window, fingers gripping the fabric of her jeans. Sophie, he said softly, if there's something you want to tell me, you can. She didn't respond at first. When she finally turned to him, her eyes held something he hadn't seen before, real, undeniable fear. He was there before, she whispered. Ethan's grip tightened on the steering wheel, but he kept his voice calm. Before, where her throat bobbed as she swallowed. At the house, when I was in the wall, a chill ran down Ethan's spine. He exhaled slowly, forcing himself to stay composed. Okay, That means we have to be extra careful now. Sophie nodded, but said nothing else. Max whined softly, sensing her distress. She reached down, running her fingers through his fur, grounding herself in his warmth. Ethan drove the rest of the way in silence, his mind racing. Whoever that man was, he wasn't just a random face in the crowd. And that meant whoever had put Sophie in that wall wasn't done looking for her. Ethan would make sure they never got the chance. Ethan pulled into the driveway and shut off the engine, his mind still reeling from Sophie's words. She was already reaching for the door handle, her small fingers gripping it tightly. Max jumped down first, circling back to her side protectively. "Sophie, listen to me," Ethan said, keeping his voice firm but calm. "I don't know who that man is, but if he had something to do with what happened to you, we need to be careful. Do you understand?" She nodded, but her eyes wouldn't meet his. Ethan got out and walked around to her side, holding the door open. She stepped down, immediately clinging to Max's fur, her other hand clutching the bag of clothes they'd picked up. Inside, the house should have felt safe, but Ethan knew better. Whoever had locked Sophie in that wall might still be looking for her, and that thought twisted his stomach into knots. Sophie sank onto the couch, her small frame nearly disappearing into the cushion. Max jumped up beside her, pressing close. Ethan ran a hand over his face. He needed a plan. "Sophie, I need to know more about him," Ethan said gently, pulling up a chair. "The man you saw today, was he alone? Did he see you?" She hesitated, fingers curling into Max's fur. I don't know if he saw me. I think he was just watching. But he was there before. Before where?" "At the house." Ethan's pulse quickened. "You remember him?" She nodded slowly. His voice, it was deep, cold. He was angry. "I don't know why. I tried not to listen. I tried to be quiet." Ethan swallowed hard, fists clenching. Someone had hurt this girl. Someone had made her afraid to even make a sound. "You're safe here," he said, forcing his voice steady. "No one's going to hurt you again." Sophie looked up at him then, her eyes searching his for reassurance, for trust. She didn't speak, but she gave a tiny nod. Ethan pushed himself up from the chair. He needed to be smart about this. Calling the police was the obvious choice, but Sophie was terrified of being found. If she'd been hidden for a reason, who was to say that people looking for her weren't dangerous? "We're going to take this one step at a time," he said. "Tonight, I'm setting up extra locks. Tomorrow, we'll talk more. You don't have to tell me everything now, but I need to know what we're up against." Sophie gave another tiny nod, but fear still lingered in her eyes. "Go, change into something comfortable," Ethan said. "I'll get blankets for the couch." She hesitated, but stood, clutching the bag of clothes against her chest as she hurried toward the guest room, Max trailing close behind. Ethan exhaled slowly and turned to the door. He double-checked the locks, then grabbed his toolbox. Reinforcing the doors and windows wouldn't stop a determined enemy, but it would buy them time, as he drilled an extra deadbolt into the back door. His mind circled back to the man in the dark jacket. If he had been near the house before, that meant he knew something. And if he came anywhere near Sophie again, Ethan would make sure he regretted it. By the time Ethan finished, the sun had set. He stepped into the living room and found Sophie, curled up on the couch, wrapped in one of her new sweaters. Max was on the floor beside her, his head resting near her hand. Her eyes were drooping, exhaustion pulling her under, but she still looked wary. Ethan draped a blanket over her. She stirred slightly, but didn't protest. "Sleep, kiddo," he murmured. "You're safe." He turned off the lamp and stepped back, watching as her breathing evened out. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Ethan sat in the armchair across the room, keeping watch. He wasn't going to let anything happen to her. Not tonight. Not ever. The next morning, Ethan Carter woke to the sound of soft whispers. Disoriented, he blinked before realizing that Sophie Bennett was sitting on the floor beside Max, murmuring to him as she ran her fingers through his fur. Max let out a low whine of contentment, his tail thumping against the carpet. Ethan sat up, stretching his stiff muscles. "Morning," Sophie turned, startled, but quickly looked away. Ethan glanced at the clock just past 7. "You sleep okay?" She gave a small shrug. "Max stayed with me." Ethan smiled. "He's good at that. You hungry?" Sophie hesitated, then nodded. Ethan pushed himself up and headed to the kitchen, pulling out some pancake mix and eggs. He figured making something warm and comforting might help ease the tension. As the pancakes cooked, Sophie shuffled to the table and sat down, watching him closely, as if unsure whether to speak. "Ethan," her voice was barely above a whisper. He turned, flipping a pancake. "Yeah," she fidgeted with the edge of the table. If that man comes back, what will you do?" Ethan set the spatula down and looked at her seriously. "I won't let him near you, Sophie. You're safe here. No one's going to hurt you." She swallowed, nodding slowly. "Okay." Ethan plated the pancakes and set them in front of her. "Now let's eat. We'll figure this out together." Sophie picked up her fork, and for the first time since he'd found her, Ethan saw a glimmer of something in her expression: hope. Ethan watched as Sophie picked at her pancake, her small fingers tapping against the edge of the plate. The weight of her question still lingered in the air, and though she had accepted his answer, he knew she was still afraid. He took a deep breath, deciding to push forward gently. "After breakfast, how about we take Max out for a walk? Fresh air might help clear our heads." Sophie hesitated, looking toward the door. "Is it safe?" Ethan nodded. "I'll be right there with you." "Max to Dot." After a long pause, she nodded. They ate in relative silence, the occasional sound of Max's tail thumping against the floor breaking the tension. Ethan cleaned up the dishes while Sophie lingered near the window, peering outside cautiously. The man in the dark jacket, shaken her more than she was letting on, and Ethan knew he had to tread carefully. "You ready?" he asked, grabbing Max's leash. Sophie turned from the window and slowly walked toward him. She reached for the leash, her fingers brushing against his. Ethan let her take it, watching as she clung to the familiarity of Max's presence. They stepped outside together, the crisp morning air filling Ethan's lungs. The town was quiet, the sound of their footsteps on the pavement faintly soothing. Sophie kept close to Ethan's side, her grip on the leash firm as Max trotted along beside her. Ethan glanced down at her. "You doing okay?" She nodded, though her shoulders remained tense. As they walked, Ethan kept an eye on their surroundings. No sign of the man in the dark jacket, no suspicious cars. But that didn't mean he wasn't out there, watching. Ethan's jaw tightened. He wouldn't let anyone take Sophie from him. They reached a small park on the edge of town, and Ethan motioned toward a bench. "Let's sit for a bit. Give Max a break." Sophie hesitated, but followed his lead. She sat beside him, her hands resting in her lap. Max flopped down in front of them, tongue hanging out as he panted happily. "I used to come here all the time," Ethan said, watching the trees sway in the breeze. "It's peaceful, always helped me think. Sophie traced a pattern on her jeans. Did you ever feel scared? Ethan turned to her. Yeah, plenty of times. She looked up at him. What did you do? Ethan considered his answer carefully. I reminded myself that I wasn't alone, that there were people and dogs who had my back. Sophie's fingers curled into the fabric of her jeans. I don't think I ever had that before. Ethan's chest tightened. He wanted to tell her she did now, that she wasn't alone anymore, but he knew words wouldn't be enough. He had to show her. You do now, he said simply. Sophie looked down at Max, running her fingers through his fur. The dog let out a content sigh, pressing into her touch. They sat there for a while, letting the moment settle. Ethan didn't push her to talk, didn't ask any more questions. He just let her be. Eventually, Sophie spoke again. Ethan, yeah. Do you think he'll come back? The man, Ethan exhaled slowly. I don't know, but if he does, he won't. Get near you, Sophie nodded, her expression unreadable. Ethan stood. Come on, let's get home. They walked back in silence, but something had shifted. Sophie still looked over her shoulder every now and then, but her grip on the leash was less frantic. She was still afraid, but she wasn't alone, and that was something. Ethan knew they had a long way to go, but he also knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to let her down. As they reached the house, Ethan glanced at the driveway, his stomach twisting. Something felt off. It wasn't anything obvious, no cars parked where they shouldn't be, no broken windows or signs of forced entry, but his gut told him something wasn't right. He placed a hand on Sophie's shoulder, stopping her just before they stepped inside. Stay close to me, okay? She nodded, her eyes darting toward the door. Ethan turned the knob slowly, pushing the door open. The house was quiet, too quiet. He motioned for Sophie to stay back as he stepped inside, scanning the living room. Nothing seemed out of place, but a strange feeling prickled at the back of his neck. Max growled softly, his body tense as he sniffed the air. Ethan moved carefully, checking each room one by one. The kitchen was clear, the hallway empty. But when he reached his bedroom, he froze. His desk drawers were open. Papers were scattered across the floor. His closet door was ajar, as if someone had been looking for something. Ethan's heart pounded. Someone had been here. He turned sharply, moving quickly back to the living room where Sophie stood, her arms wrapped around herself. Did you see anything? Hear anything? She shook her head, her face pale. No, Ethan clenched his jaw. Whoever it was, they hadn't taken anything valuable, at least. Nothing obvious. But that wasn't the point. Someone had broken in. Someone had gone through his things, and that meant they knew where Sophie was. Ethan moved to the front door, checking the locks again. Everything was still in place, no forced entry. Whoever had come in had either picked the lock or had another way in. He turned to Sophie. We're not staying here tonight. Pack a bag, we're leaving. Sophie's eyes widened. Where are we going? Somewhere safe. She hesitated, but nodded, hurrying toward her room with Max following close behind. Ethan grabbed his own bag, stuffing in essentials. His mind raced. He had a few places in mind, friends he trusted, places no one would think to look. But he had to act fast. By the time Sophie returned, her bag clutched tightly in her hands. Ethan had the truck keys in his grip. Let's go. They stepped outside, and Ethan locked the door behind them. As they pulled out of the driveway, he glanced in the rearview mirror, his grip tightening on the wheel. He had a sinking feeling this was only the beginning. Ethan kept his eyes on the road as the truck rumbled down the highway, his hands gripping the wheel tighter than necessary. The headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the empty stretch ahead. He glanced at Sophie in the passenger seat. She was curled up, hugging her backpack, her eyes flickering open and closed. Max lay stretched across the back seat, his ears twitching with every bump in the road. "We're going to be okay," Ethan said, breaking the silence. "I have a place we can go. A friend of mine owns a cabin outside of town. No one will find us there." Sophie nodded, but she didn't speak. Ethan knew she was scared, so was he. Someone had broken into his home, rifled through his belongings. That wasn't just a coincidence. Someone was looking for her, and they weren't giving up. Easily, Ethan adjusted the rearview mirror, checking to see if they were being followed. So far, nothing. Still, he kept the truck at a steady speed, resisting the urge to push the gas pedal to the floor. If someone was watching, he didn't want to make it obvious that he was running. The drive stretched on in tense silence, the sound of the tires humming against the asphalt the only noise in the cab. Ethan kept his focus sharp, his mind running through the possibilities. Who had been in his house? And how had they gotten in without breaking anything? Eventually, the city lights disappeared behind them, replaced by dense trees and open road. The cabin wasn't far now. Ethan exhaled slowly, trying to calm his nerves. They would be safe there at least, for a little while. Sophie shifted beside him, blinking up at him sleepily. "How do you know we'll be safe?" Ethan hesitated. He didn't want to lie to her. "Because I won't let anything happen to you." She studied him for a moment, then nodded. Okay, it wasn't much, but it was enough. When they finally pulled off the main road onto a gravel path, Ethan's shoulders relaxed slightly. The cabin sat nestled between towering pine trees, its windows dark, the outline barely visible against the night sky. Ethan parked the truck and turned off the engine. The night air was crisp, filled with the scent of damp earth and pine. "Come on," he said, grabbing his bag from the back. "Let's get inside." Sophie slid out of the truck, pulling her backpack over her shoulders. Max jumped down beside her, his tail wagging slightly as he sniffed the air. Ethan led the way up the steps, pulling out a key from his pocket. The cabin wasn't his, but his friend had always told him he was welcome to use it if he ever needed to get away. This definitely counted as getting away. Ethan pushed the door open, flipping on the lights. The cabin was small but cozy, a stone fireplace in the corner, a couch that had seen better days, a wooden table in the center of the room. A small kitchen was tucked into the back. It wasn't fancy, but it was safe. Sophie stepped inside cautiously, her eyes scanning the space. "No one else is here." "Just us," Ethan assured her. "You can take the bedroom. I'll stay out here." She nodded slowly, setting her backpack down near the couch. Max trotted around, sniffing every corner before finally settling near the fireplace. Ethan watched Sophie as she ran her fingers over the worn fabric of the couch, her face unreadable. "Do you think they'll find us?" she asked quietly. Ethan crouched down to her level. "I don't know, but I do know that I won't let them take you." Sophie chewed her bottom lip but didn't argue. Ethan reached out and ruffled her hair gently. "Get some rest, kiddo. We've got a long day ahead of us." She hesitated before nodding, then grabbed her backpack and disappeared into the bedroom. Ethan let out a slow breath, rubbing a hand over his face. He moved to the windows, pulling the curtains closed, before locking the door behind him. Then he grabbed the rifle from the cabinet above the fireplace, just in case. Ethan didn't sleep much that night. He sat by the window, the rifle across his lap, listening to the stillness outside. Max lay beside him, ears perked, as if sensing Ethan's unease. Every little creak in the cabin made his muscles tense, his grip tightening round the gun. Somewhere, past midnight, Ethan heard soft footsteps. He turned his head slightly, relaxing when he saw Sophie standing in the doorway, wrapped in one of the blankets from the bed. "Can't sleep?" he asked. She shook her head, stepping closer. "I keep hearing things." Ethan nodded. "Me too, but we're safe here." Sophie hesitated before sitting down beside him. "What if they come anyway?" Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Then we'll be ready." Sophie stared at him for a moment, then curled up against the armrest of the couch, resting her head on her folded arms. I wish I could believe that Ethan didn't have an answer for her. So he just sat there, watching the darkness outside, waiting for morning. Ethan sat in silence, listening to Sophie's slow, steady breathing. She had finally drifted off, curled into the couch with the blanket wrapped tightly around her. He wished he could relax, but the weight of everything sat heavy in his chest. Someone had broken into his house. Someone was after Sophie, and he had no idea who it was, so how far they were willing to go. Max let out a quiet whimper in his sleep, his paws twitching as if he were running in a dream. Ethan reached down, scratching behind his ears. Grounding himself in the moment, he needed to think clearly. The cabin was safe for now, but how long would that last? The people searching for Sophie clearly had resources. His locked house had been broken into without any sign of forced entry. If they had found his home, it was only a matter of time before they found this place. Ethan stood up slowly, stretching his stiff muscles. He moved toward the window, peeking through the curtains into the darkness beyond. The forest was quiet. That didn't mean they were alone. He checked his watch. Almost 3 a.m. He needed rest, but his body wouldn't let him. Instead, he quietly made his way to the kitchen, grabbing a glass of water and splashing his face in the sink. He needed a plan. The next morning, Ethan woke to the sound of movement. He had finally dozed off in the armchair, his rifle still resting across his lap. Sophie was up, standing by the table, rubbing the sleep from her eyes. Max was at her feet, tail wagging gently. "Morning," Ethan said, pushing himself up. Sophie gave him a small nod. "Did you sleep?" "A little," he admitted. "How about you?" She shrugged. "Okay, I guess." Ethan poured them both some orange juice and pulled out a box of cereal from the cabinets. "We need to talk about what's next," he said, keeping his voice calm. "We can't stay here forever. We need to figure out what's going on." Sophie looked up at him, hesitation in her eyes. "What if we just stay hidden?" Ethan sighed. "I wish it were that easy, kiddo. But hiding only works for so long. Whoever's looking for you, they're not going to stop until they find you." She looked down at her glass, running her fingers along the rim. "Then what do we do?" Ethan thought for a moment. "First, I need to figure out who we're dealing with. There's someone I trust who might have answers, an old friend. I'll make a few calls, see what I can find out. In the meantime, we stay alert. No unnecessary risks." Sophie swallowed hard, nodding. Ethan could see the fear in her eyes, but she was trying to be brave. He had to respect that. After breakfast, Ethan stepped outside to make his call. The air was cool, the forest quiet except for the rustling of leaves. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in. "Years, this is Ryan." Ryan, it's Ethan. I need a favor. There was a brief pause. Ethan, it's been a while. You in trouble, not me, a kid. She's in danger. Someone broke into my house looking for her. I need to know who. Ryan let out a low whistle. That's serious. What do you have so far? Not much. Just a feeling that whoever's after her isn't going to stop. I need information. Anything you can dig up. All right, Ryan said. Send me what you know, and I'll see what I can find. Might take a few hours. Thanks, Ryan. I owe you. You owe me plenty already, Ryan chuckled. I'll call you back when I have something. Stay safe. Ethan ended the call and took a deep breath. He had taken the first step. Now they had to wait. Back inside the cabin, Sophie Bennett sat on the couch, her knees drawn tightly to her chest. She looked up when Ethan Carter walked in, her eyes searching for answers. Who were you talking to? A friend, Ethan replied. He's going to look into things for us. Sophie nodded, hugging her knees even tighter, as if trying to make herself smaller. Her voice was barely a whisper when she spoke again. What if they find us first? Ethan knelt in front of her, his gaze steady. Then we fight back. We don't let them win. Sophie pressed her lips into a thin line. She didn't look convinced, but at least the raw terror in her eyes had dulled. Ethan would take that as a small victory. The day passed in slow, agonizing stretches, tense silences, cautious glances out the window. Ethan spent most of his time securing the cabin, reinforcing doors, checking the perimeter. Max stayed close to Sophie, sensing her unease. Every now and then, she would reach down and run her fingers through his fur, drawing comfort from his warmth. By late afternoon, Ethan's phone rang. He answered immediately. Ryan, you got something for me? Ryan's voice was grim. The girl, Sophie, right. She's not just some random kid. She was part of a case a few years back. Went missing under suspicious circumstances. No record of foster placement, no known relatives. And here's the kicker, her disappearance was linked to some shady people. The kind you don't want to mess with. Ethan's stomach tightened. What kind of people? Private interests. Wealthy, powerful. The kind who can make problems disappear. Whatever Sophie was part of, it wasn't legal. And now it looks like someone wants to clean up loose ends. Ethan's grip on the phone turned bone-white, meaning they won't stop until they have her. Exactly, Ryan confirmed. You need to be careful. If they broke into your house, they're already close. It's only a matter of time before they find you. Ethan exhaled, forcing himself to stay calm. Thanks, Ryan. I'll handle it. Be smart, Ethan, I mean it. These people don't play fair. The call ended, and Ethan turned to Sophie. She was watching him, her face pale, worry etched into every line of her expression. They know where I am, don't they? Ethan sat beside her, his voice low. Not yet, but they will soon. Sophie swallowed hard, her hands tightening into fists. Then we have to go. Ethan looked at her, surprised by the sudden steel in her voice. Go where? She took a deep breath. I don't know, but if they're looking for me, I don't want to just sit here and wait. I don't want to be afraid anymore. Ethan nodded slowly, pride flickering in his chest. All right, kiddo. We'll figure it out together. They didn't have much time, but at least now they had a plan. Ethan sat on the edge of the worn couch, rubbing his temples as he tried to piece together their next move. His gut told him they were running out of time. If the people hunting Sophie had already found his house, the cabin wouldn't stay hidden for long. Running wasn't a choice, it was survival. Sophie sat across from him, knees pulled to her chest. She looked exhausted, but there was a new determination in her eyes. "Where do we go?" she asked quietly. Ethan exhaled. "We need to stave off the grid. I know a place, an old ranch, 2 states over. It's abandoned, isolated. We can stay there until I figure out our next move." Sophie hesitated, then nodded. "When do we leave?" "As soon as possible." Ethan stood, moving to the window. The woods outside were still, too still. He didn't trust the quiet. "Pack whatever you need. We travel light. If we're lucky, we have a few hours before they get here." Sophie didn't argue. She grabbed her backpack, shoving in the few belongings she had. Ethan did the same: wallet, food, extra ammunition. Max sat near the door, ears perked. Sensing the urgency in the air, Ethan slung his bag over his shoulder and crouched in front of Sophie. "Listen to me, when we leave, we don't stop. Until we're out of this state. No main roads, no risks. If anything feels wrong, you tell me." Sophie nodded, her fingers clutching the straps of her backpack. Ethan gave her shoulder a reassuring squeeze. "Let's go." They slipped out of the cabin under the cover of early morning darkness. Ethan guided them through the trees to where he had hidden the truck far enough from the cabin to avoid notice. He had learned long ago never to make an escape route obvious. As they approached, he scanned the area, ensuring they were alone. He opened the passenger door for Sophie, helping her inside. Max jumped into the back without hesitation. Ethan checked the perimeter one last time before sliding into the driver's seat. The engine roared to life, and he pulled onto the dirt road. Driving fast, but controlled. For the first hour, they drove in silence. Ethan kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see headlights behind them. But there was nothing, just trees and the fading night sky. Sophie shifted in her seat. "Do you think they're still looking for us?" Ethan kept his eyes on the road. "They won't stop until they find you. But we're not going to make it easy for them." Sophie didn't respond. She turned her gaze out the window, watching the world blur past. Hours later, they crossed the state line. Ethan turned off the main highway, taking a back road toward the old ranch. The landscape changed, trees thinning into open fields, the air growing heavier with silence. Too silent, Ethan's grip tightened on the wheel as they approached the turnoff. The dirt road was overgrown, the gate hanging loose on its hinges. No signs of life. Good. He pulled up near the house and killed the engine. "Stay in the truck," he told Sophie as he stepped out. Max whined but stayed put. Ethan scanned the area, checking for disturbances. The house was weathered but intact. He approached cautiously, hand hovering near his gun. The front door creaked as he pushed it open. Dust coated every surface, but it was clear no one had been here in years. He moved through each room, checking windows, ensuring they were alone. Satisfied, he returned to the truck and nodded at Sophie. "It's safe." She climbed out, Max bounding after her, sniffing the unfamiliar. Ethan locked the truck and led them inside. The ranch wasn't much, but it would do. "We'll stay here for a while," Ethan said, dropping his bag. "No lights at night. We stay low. If we hear anything, we leave immediately." Sophie nodded, sinking onto the old couch. "Okay." Ethan rubbed the back of his neck. "You hungry?" She shook her head, exhaustion weighing on her. "Get some rest," he said. "I'll keep watch." Sophie hesitated. then finally lay down, using her backpack as a pillow. Max curled up beside her, tail flicking against the dusty floor. Ethan moved to the front window, pulling out his gun. He stared into the dark fields beyond, listening to the wind whisper through the trees. They were safe, for now. But Ethan knew better than to let his guard down. Someone was still out there, and they weren't finished yet. As the night wore on, Ethan fought to stay alert, but exhaustion dragged at him. Every sound, an owl's call, the groan of old wood made his nerves tighten. Max, too, remained on edge, ears twitching at every noise. Then, near dawn, a distant hum reached Ethan's ears. An engine. His pulse spiked. He turned to Sophie, still curled on the couch, breathing softly. Then he moved. "Sophie, wake up. We have to go." Now, she stirred, eyes heavy with sleep, but the urgency in his voice snapped her awake. "What's wrong?" "They're here." Fear flashed across her face. Max let out a low growl. Ethan grabbed their bags, tossing one to Sophie. "Get to the truck. I'll cover you." She didn't argue. She scrambled to her feet, clutching Max's leash as they hurried outside. Ethan followed, gun in hand. The headlights cut through the early morning mist. Getting closer, too close. Ethan's pulse pounded as he ushered Sophie and Max toward the truck. The vehicle behind them was speeding up. "Get in," he barked, yanking. "Open the passenger door." Sophie climbed inside, pulling Max up with her. The dog whined, but stayed close. Ethan slammed the door shut and jumped into the driver's seat, shoving the key into the ignition. The truck roared to life just as the SUV rounded the last curve. Ethan threw the truck into reverse, kicking up dust as he spun them around. Tires skidded before catching, launching them forward. "Hold on." Sophie clutched Max to her chest, eyes wide as she twisted to watch their pursuers. "Ethan, they're speeding up." He stole a glance in the rearview mirror. The SUV was gaining, its high beams blinding. His stomach twisted. They weren't here to talk. Ethan's mind raced. The ranch's dirt road fed into a winding trail that led back to the highway. If he could make it there, they might blend into traffic. But it was a gamble. He made a split-second decision, veering sharply into the trees. The truck bounced violently over uneven terrain, branches scraping the windows as they tore through the underbrush. Sophie cried out as she was thrown against the seatbelt. "Ethan, where are we going?" "Away," he gritted out. "Hang on," the SUV struggled to follow, its bulk making the tight turns difficult. Ethan knew these woods better than they did. He had to use that. A loud crack sounded as something slammed into the truck's side. Ethan cursed but kept going. Up ahead, a shallow creek cut through the land. If he could make it across, the thick trees beyond would give them cover. "We're jumping it," he warned. Sophie gasped. "Jump what?" Before she could argue, the truck lurched over the ravine, tires slamming onto the opposite bank with a jolt. The undercarriage scraped, but they made it. Ethan checked the mirror. The SUV hesitated at the creek's edge, its driver debating whether to follow. Ethan didn't wait. He floored the gas, tearing deeper into the forest until the trees swallowed them whole. For several tense minutes, they drove in silence. Only the engine and the frantic beat of Ethan's heart filled the air. Finally, after miles of dense woodland, he spotted a narrow service road. He took the turn, slowing just enough to avoid suspicion. Only when he was sure they weren't being followed did he let out a slow breath. "Did we lose them?" Sophie whispered. Ethan nodded, though his grip on the wheel didn't loosen. For now, a heavy silence settled between them. They both knew this wasn't over. "We can't stay here," Sophie said softly. "They'll keep coming." Ethan clenched his jaw. She was right. They had to keep moving. "We'll find another safe house. Somewhere. They won't expect. But we need supplies first." Sophie nodded, determination flickering behind the fear in her eyes. Ethan turned the truck onto a hidden back road, driving deeper into the unknown. They weren't safe yet, but as long as they stayed ahead of the people chasing them, they still had a fighting chance. As the sun rose higher, Ethan pulled into a small gas station on the outskirts of an unfamiliar town, the kind of place where no one asked questions. He turned to Sophie. "Stay in the truck. Lock the doors. If anything happens, you know what to do." Sophie swallowed hard but nodded. Max sat up, watching Ethan as he stepped out. Ethan moved quickly for the tank, grabbing bottled water, protein bars, and a map. He paid in cash, keeping his head down as he stepped back outside. His heart stopped. A black sedan was parked near the entrance, and the driver was staring right at him. Ethan didn't hesitate. He climbed into the truck, started the engine, and peeled out of the lot. The sedan pulled out after them. "They found us again," Sophie whispered, gripping the seat. Ethan clenched his jaw. "Then we make sure they don't catch us." He accelerated onto the highway, weaving between cars. The sedan matched his every move, staying on their tail. Whoever these people were, they were relentless. Ethan had one last option, an old dirt path leading through an abandoned quarry. Risky, but if he could lose them in the maze of rock and dust, they might disappear for good. Making a sharp turn, he sent the truck barreling down the dirt path, dust swallowing them whole. The sedan followed. Ethan's mind raced. He had to end this chase now. Ethan gritted his teeth, pressing the gas pedal to the floor. The truck bounced violently over the uneven path, tires kicking up a blinding dust cloud. The sedan behind them struggled to keep control. Sophie clutched Max tightly, her knuckles white. "Ethan, what do we do?" "We lose them," he growled up ahead. The path split into two narrow roads. Taking the wrong one could trap them. Ethan made a sharp left, cutting down the more overgrown path. Branches scraped the windows as they tore through the underbrush. The sedan swerved to follow, tires skidding dangerously close to the edge. Ethan spotted an old wooden bridge ahead, narrow, barely wide enough for the truck. "Hold on," he barked. Sophie squeezed her eyes shut as Ethan gunned the engine, barreling onto the bridge. The wood groaned under their weight, but they made it across. The sedan's driver hesitated, then followed. The bridge wasn't built for that much weight. A splintering crack echoed through the trees as the sedan plunged into the ravine below. Sophie let out a shaky breath. "Did they? They're not following us anymore," Ethan said, not slowing down. "But we can't stay here." He drove for another hour, taking random turns, switching to smaller roads. When he was sure no one was behind them, he finally pulled into a small, nearly abandoned town. Most buildings looked unused for years, which was exactly what they needed. He parked behind a rundown gas station and turned to Sophie. "We lay low. Here, no lights, no sounds. We stay inside." Sophie nodded, face pale. She reached for Max, hugging him tightly. Ethan stepped out, scanning their surroundings before motioning for her to follow. Inside the gas station, the air was stale, shelves empty except for dust-covered cans. A faded closed sign hung from the door. "Perfect Ethan, found an old storage room in the back. We'll rest here. Sophie curled up against the wall, Max lying beside her protectively. Ethan sat by the door, gun resting on his knee. He didn't know how much time they had, but he knew one thing. He wasn't letting anyone take Sophie. Not now, not ever. As the hours stretched on, the silence in the abandoned town grew heavier. Ethan forced himself to stay alert, listening for any sign of danger. Sophie, exhausted, eventually dozed off, her head resting against Max's fur. Then a sudden creak outside. Ethan froze. Another sound, a slow, deliberate footstep on the wooden porch. He moved silently, pressing himself against the wall near the doorway. Someone was breathing just outside. Ethan yanked the door open, gun raised. A man stood there, hands up in surrender. Older, late 50s, grizzled beard, weary eyes. "Name's Walter," he said, voice rough. "Saw your truck. Thought you might need help." Ethan didn't lower his gun. "Help with what?" Walter gestured toward the empty town. "You ain't the first folks to come through here looking to hide. People like us gotta stick together." Ethan studied him. He didn't trust easily, but they were running out of options. "We're just passing through," he said carefully. Walter nodded, figured. "But if you're running from someone, you might want to know they've been sniffing around." Ethan's stomach dropped. "Who?" "Couple of men in suits, fancy car. Came through an hour ago, asking questions. Didn't like my answers, so they left. But they'll be back." Ethan clenched his jaw. "We need to go." Walter scratched his chin. "Got a place a few miles out. Ain't much, but it's off the grid. Safe. You're welcome to use it." Ethan hesitated. Trust was dangerous, but staying here was worse. Sophie stirred. Behind him, rubbing her eyes. "Ethan, what's going on?" He glanced at her, then back at Walter. "We'll follow you." "But if this is a trap," Walter held up a hand. "Ain't a trap, son. Just an old man trying to do right." Ethan exhaled. "Lead the way." They gathered their things quickly. Sophie clutched Max as they followed Walter to his truck. Ethan kept a careful distance as they drove deeper into the wilderness. He didn't know if this was the right call, but staying put wasn't an option, and whatever waited for them at Walter's place, it had to be safer than the alternative. Ethan followed Walter's truck down a winding dirt road, trees thickening around them. Sophie sat in silence beside him, hands clenched in her lap. Max dozed lightly at her feet, ears twitching. After what felt like an eternity, Walter stopped in front of a small, weathered cabin, barely visible among the trees. "It ain't much," Walter said, stepping out, "but it'll do. Won't find it." On any maps, Ethan scanned the area, secluded. Good. Sophie hesitated before opening her door, sticking close to Ethan as they approached. Walter noticed and gave a small nod. "No one's going to hurt you here, kid. You got my word." Ethan pushed the door open first, checking inside before letting Sophie step through. The cabin was simple, one large room with an old wood stove, a rickety table, and a cot against the far wall. It smelled of pine and dust. "Water runs off a well," Walter said, dropping his keys on the table. "No electricity, but there's firewood. Should be safe enough until you figure out your next move." Ethan turned to him. "Why are you helping us?" Walter sighed, sitting heavily. On a chair, had a daughter once. She got mixed up with the wrong people. I couldn't save her. Guess this is my way of making up for it. Ethan studied him. He had seen enough men like Walter to know he wasn't lying. "Thank you," Walter waved him off. "Don't thank me yet." Those men in suits, they'll be back. You need to be ready. Sophie sat on the cot, silent. Ethan knelt in front of her. We'll be okay here for now. She nodded, but didn't meet his eyes. They'll never stop looking, will they? Ethan hesitated. No, but I won't let them find you. Max nudged Sophie's hand. She wrapped her arms around him, burying her face in his fur. Ethan knew she needed more than promises. She needed action. I need to make a call, he said, standing. Walter, you've got a way to reach someone without it being traced. Walter rubbed his jaw, then nodded. There's an old radio out back. It'll do the job. Ethan followed him outside. The radio was covered in dust, but it worked. Ryan, you there? Static, then Ryan's voice. Ethan, where the hell have you been? We ran into trouble. I need intel. The people after Sophie, they're not just private security, are they? Ryan hesitated. No, they're worse. The girls, valuable to them, Ethan. I dug deeper. What I found isn't good. Whoever she was taken from, they're powerful, government level, and they're not going to stop until they have her back. Ethan's fist clenched. There has to be a way out. There might be, Ryan said, but it's risky. You need to disappear. Completely. Change identities. Leave the country if you have to. It's the only way to keep her safe. Ethan's stomach twisted. He had spent years on the run before, but this was different. I'll figure something out. Keep digging. Let me know if you find anything. And Ethan, be careful. These people don't leave loose ends. The call ended. Ethan turned back to the cabin. Sophie was still curled up with Max. Walter watched over her like a silent guardian. Ethan knew what had to be done. They couldn't just keep running. They had to disappear. For good. That night, as the fire crackled in the stove, Ethan sat beside Sophie, his voice low. We're going to leave. Not just this place, everything. New names, new lives. We'll go somewhere they'll never find us. But it has to be your choice. Sophie looked at him, fear and hope warring in her eyes. You'll stay with me, Ethan took her hand, squeezing gently. Always. She swallowed hard, then nodded. Okay, Ethan glanced at Walter. You know, a way out of the country, Walter smirked. I know a few, and with that, the plan was set. They would vanish, slipping through the cracks before anyone could catch them. It wouldn't be easy, it wouldn't be safe, but for Sophie it was the only way. The next morning, Walter led them to an old airstrip hidden in the woods. A single propeller plane waited, its piloter, friend of Walter's, prepping for takeoff. Ethan loaded their few belongings, helping Sophie into the cabin. She held Max close, fingers trembling slightly. Walter clapped Ethan on the shoulder. You take care of her. I will. With one last nod, Ethan climbed aboard. The engine roared, too. Life, as the plane lifted off, the world below grew smaller. They were leaving behind everything Ethan's old life, their past, their fear. Sophie turned to him as the clouds swallowed them. Where are we going? Ethan smiled faintly. Somewhere. Safe. Somewhere new. For the first time in what felt like forever. Sophie exhaled and closed her eyes. She was safe. She was free. And no matter what came, next Ethan would make sure she stayed that way.